So this is what our students want us to know about pandemic learning. It's a blog that I wrote because I had done a survey. I was thinking about what is the student perspective on all of this. We hear so much from adults on what teaching and learning looks like during the pandemic, but we don't often ask the students, which I think is a mistake. So I surveyed students and got over 100 responses from a few different countries. And they remarked about things such as, why is this so hard for them? And they said it's hard because, they don't have access, or the assignments can be really difficult. As I went through asking about 11 questions, we started to get a little bit deeper when it came to the assignments. Because what I started to see when I had been coding different comments and questions that came up on a couple of Facebook teaching pandemic pages is the accountability piece. We always talk about accountability. We seem to want accountability for everybody else, but we don't want accountability for ourselves all the time. But we notice that we definitely want accountability for students. But a lot of that's gone. The grades that we usually use, those are gone from no harm policies that schools have had. Or we can't require students to show up. Or, the adult control we usually have in a classroom is gone right now. So we're noticing that students are not necessarily always engaging, and I wanted to know why they weren't engaging. Sometimes it was due to the content. That was sort of the biggest factor. If they didn't like the content, they weren't going to show up. Sometimes part of that was the teacher. If they didn't find the teacher engaging, then they weren't going to show up. But when it came to the assignments, I wanted to know more. I found that really interesting. So what they said was they didn't like the assignments that were review. They didn't like that teachers would just upload an assignment to Google Classroom and say, do that. What they missed and what they want more of are Zoom meetings where they not only see their teacher, but they can see their friends as well. There are a couple of reasons why that's so important. Number one, we are in a pandemic. There's lots of chaos going on around us. We watch the news and it can be depressing. So when a student can see the face of their teacher, or teachers can see the faces of their leaders, there's a sense of calm that may be able to come from this. That they know that as chaotic as part of their life is right now, they can look at a teacher and they can feel like there's some level of normalcy. But the other part is really important too. Because what we know is from research is that students learn better when they can engage in dialogue with other students. So those Zoom chat rooms or Google Meets or whatever we use in order to get students to talk to one another is actually really important. Now, it's also equally as important that we have teacher clarity and we have proper success criteria behind that. But the other part that they don't like is that whole idea of uploading assignments or doing review. Now, that's very difficult for teachers because sometimes teachers have been required to only do review from their school districts. So perhaps instead of fighting it, we need to look at doing it differently. Students didn't like the review if it was just the same kind of worksheet that they did a few months ago. What they would like is that if we could do that review in another way, and because we don't have those accountability measures I talked about before, things like grading, we actually have more freedom to allow students their own choice, or to be able to do it in a way that they choose, or that we can look at surface deep and transfer level through things like project-based learning or developing conceptual understanding. Just because it's review doesn't mean it needs to be boring. It means that it can be given in a different way. What I found most surprising when I wrote and posted the blog on what students want us to know about pandemic learning was the adult reaction through social media. I heard from so many people that said things like, I've read so much from adults about pandemic learning, but this is the first blog that I've ever seen from students. And I think that's odd because so many of us spend so much time talking about student learning. Why would it be such a shock that we would want the student perspective? So this is what I'm asking of you. If you have not engaged in a lot of dialogue with your students, try to find ways to be able to do that through Zoom meetings. If you're an administrator that's setting a guideline that you can't do that, start to think about loosening it up. Because you're going to lose more students if teachers keep uploading worksheets to an assignment. But you're going to gain more engagement if you give students the opportunity to talk between their peers and also with their teacher. And if you haven't asked for feedback on what's working and what is not, try to do that with your students, because what they will give you is really important information. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, anytime we get feedback, it stings a little bit. But the reality is, after that sting goes away, we might start to change our practices. And therefore, we can start to go from pandemic teaching to actual virtual teaching, something we might want to get used to, because this could be something that we have to deal with in the fall. And one more thing. What we know from the student surveys is that they find new learning to be difficult. But at some point, we're not going to be able to escape that. So one of the questions that I asked of teachers, they'll come out in a future blog, and one of the same question that I asked of students is, what are the things that you hope that you are doing now in this pandemic learning experience that you'll be able to do in the future when you're back in the classroom? And that new learning piece is the key, because we know that students find it difficult. And when they're alone, it's a lot harder to be motivated and move on. So one of the things we do have to do when we actually get back into the classroom is try to figure out a way so students aren't so dependent on us. So they are feeling that cognitive conflict, because when they are on their own again and they're doing a virtual learning experience, they won't find it so hard to be motivated. They won't find it so hard to be able to move on, because they'll be used to that cognitive conflict and they'll be able to experience their own learning, which we know there's a deeper sense of pride that goes along with it. Thank you for your time.